hope that you all remain well. My name is Craig Lillehei, and on behalf of my co-chair, Chuck Schneider, and our entire Professional Development Committee, we'd like to welcome you to APSA's second annual Top Educational Content, or TEC Talks. These were patterned on the popular internet TED Talks. Our intent was for each speaker to boil down the essential elements of what we needed to know with few slides in about 15 minutes. Now, in truth, at our 50th APSA meeting in Boston last year, we weren't really sure what to expect. But as Stephen Lee reminded us in his marvelous review last week of that session, they nailed it. Each presenter gave us just what we needed to know to save lives and save lifetimes. Our most important task at the PDC is to collect, review, and prioritize the knowledge or practice gaps of our profession. These are then addressed in a variety of different ways, including expert questions and discussions, which are available in the PED-Surg Library website or through NAT, in Todd Ponsky's Global Cast reviews, as articles of interest, or the Sunday Space Learning modules. But most importantly, by the work of so many APSA committees, which we see here and beyond. Thank you. The TEC Talks are one more venue for our top 4 educational topics each year. Our only ask of you is to submit your knowledge or practice gaps to us. So just mark KG or knowledge gap in the chat box, or submit them to us at think@eapsa.org. We need and value your input. We're looking for the wisdom of our crowd. Now, let's get on with it. To kick off this year's TEC Talks, we want to introduce Matt Harting of the University of Texas in Houston with What Better Challenge Congenital Diaphragmatic Hernia. The title is The Uncharted Path Forward in CDH. Matt, the podium is yours.
I think this is one of the most powerful words in the English language. We hope that we will soon find ourselves beyond this pandemic state in a new world that is perhaps better than before. More to come on that new world later. I'm honored to be a member of this organization now more than ever, an organization that offers hope every day through this challenging time and beyond. In fact, lifetimes of hope. I have hope that we won't be managing CDH at the end of my career as we were at the beginning. But hope is not enough. We must chart a path forward and move down that path for this hope to become a reality. Thank you to the APSA Program Committee, David Powell, Craig Lillehei, to the team of folks who've worked tirelessly to make this meeting a reality. I'm honored to have the opportunity to interact with the APSA community in this novel way. We're going to spend the next few minutes discussing an opportunity. So if I were to pose this question to the audience, following a smooth cannulation to ECLS for CDH, like we know they all are, what's your preferred diaphragmatic repair strategy? Consider what your answer might be. Planned early on ECLS? Planned mid or late on ECLS? Planned off ECLS, but you might prefer to try a late salvage if unsuccessful, or a planned off and no repair if unsuccessful, or maybe some nuanced strategy that's not noted here. Well, at a recent gathering of international CDH investigators, this question regarding timing of repair led to these answers and serves as an example of variability in CDH. Among 150 respondents, here's how they responded. And while early repair was the most common approach among these choices, late repair and off ECLS repair and some of these hybrid approaches were very common answers. While variability may represent local nuances, strengths, tradition, the way we were taught, it does reflect lack of a clear, best approach, and it may represent missed opportunities. Further, it clearly risks missing best practice or even possibly evidence-based practice, and it may contribute to inconsistent results. Following a clinical practice guideline has been studied in many fields, including our own. And although complicated appendicitis usually follows a more straightforward course as compared to CDH, previous work has shown that standardization through clinical practice guideline use results in better outcomes and improved value of care. But let's shift back to CDH and examine 3 specific care strategies: a pharmacologic one, a support measure, and a surgical intervention. On the y-axis, you have the percentage of CDH cases where the given intervention, which is shown on the x-axis, was used in any particular center. For inhaled nitric oxide, the median is just above 60% of cases, with an interquartile range stretching from 45 to 80% and an overall range from 0 to 100. For ECLS, the median is just above 30% of cases, with an interquartile range stretching from 20 to 40% and an overall range from 5 to 60%. Finally, for surgical repair, the median is just above 80% of cases, with an interquartile range stretching from 70 to 90% and an overall range from 60 to 97%. Even when you risk stratify, there are no significant differences. Irrespective of how you mold these numbers, the variability is obvious and it's staggering. The challenge for all of us is addressing this variability. So this is Kate. When Kate's CDH is managed, is the best course of action for both Kate and the more than 1,000 kids managed annually in the United States to be managed differently based on where she was born? Well, in order to explore this, we have to first address the why. And perhaps the why is found in the overall complexity of care. There is known center, surgeon, intensivist, care team bias, varying degrees of comfort with certain care measures, and varying levels of quality. There are a myriad of specialties involved: critical care to surgery, numerous attendings, and then trainees who are all making decisions on these specific patients. There's clearly variation in center experience or volume. Let's think about your own center. It's very likely that you manage at least 1 CDH patient per year, yet you manage less than 50 CDH patients per year. CDH finds itself in this odd sweet spot. If there were fewer, like there are in children's oncology, following a protocol is nearly a mandate. Yet when there are more, the opportunity for the development of evidence-based practice exists and is more readily opportunity. There's a lack of evidence to guide decision-making. And so when you take these all together, what you have is a multi-specialty, multi-organ system, multi-therapeutic from ventilator to ECLS, and multi-location, fetal, through delivery, the NICU, the operating room, and beyond, disease. So no wonder CDH is challenging. So the solution to answering questions of variability in medicine has always been a clinical trial. And more specifically, a randomized clinical trial. In CDH, it turns out, if you search PubMed, there are about 18 clinical trials over the last 50 years in CDH. Here are 2 recent. They actually represent the diversity of these trials. One was the Vici trial, and the other was a trial on distending pressure in CDH, conducted over the last few years. I think one of the questions we have to stop and ask ourselves revolves around the quality of these trials. And I'm certainly not throwing stones. These are well-conducted trials by good groups, but the Vichy trial was stopped early. And the distending pressure trial had 17 total patients. In fact, if you look at all of these clinical trials, you exclude the Vichy trial though, there were 415 total patients, an average of 28 per trial, 14 per arm. Now, I'm a pure clinical trialist, whatever that means. I believe in the clinical trial. I believe it's the way to develop best evidence. But let's be honest with ourselves. Clinical trials are resource intensive. They take a long time to conduct, oftentimes more than a decade. There are real challenges to conducting these types of trials, consent and recruitment challenges. And then at the end of all that effort, we've answered a single question. Maybe. Is that the solution? Is that the best solution? In fact, is that the path we're left to travel? Straightforward, straight in front of us, over and over and over. Perhaps if we look a little bit harder, there is an alternative. In fact, I think there may be an alternative path forward. Serendipity may play a role here. In a recent Viewpoint piece addressing the fast approaching post-COVID world, Don Berwick noted 6 properties of care which actually may experience durable change in this new post-COVID world. These 6 properties are tempo, standards, working conditions, proximity, preparedness, and equity. And regarding standards, he noted that clinicians and patients in the new normal may be less tolerant of unwarranted variation in healthcare practices. And he posed this question: will the new normal embrace global learning, shared knowledge, and trusted expertise as foundations for reducing harmful, wasteful, and unscientific variation in care? To start to address variation, we must consider what alignment or standardization might look like. In a recent study, the goal was to show how variable management was. In fact, that was the hypothesis, that management in CDH was highly variable. And while certainly variability was identified, an analysis of 27 clinical practice guidelines found that within specific elements, we were all far more aligned than we had thought. Now let's look at one specific element, ventilation. Blood gas targets and ventilator limits were remarkably, actually surprisingly aligned. I would guess that over 75% of the members viewing this right now could come to an agreement on a target oxygen saturation and an upper limit for peak pressure. Moreover, there's precedent here. Our friends across the pond and our friends to the north have generated clinical practice guidelines and actually used them to conduct multi-center trials. So it is possible, but it's important to look at the details. We must take into account local nuances. Many of the principles laid out in Europe and Canada laid an outstanding foundation. We have to take those into account. We must consider current evidence. And we have to consider the guidelines that many of us use right now at our individual centers. And if you believe that it is possible to get some centers to align care, at least within reason, well, let's consider these dots. These dots represent individual centers, and the spread represents the variability of care. With clinical practice guideline adoption, everyone will soon be perfectly aligned right there. No, I'm completely kidding. That's absolutely not possible. This is absolutely clearly a Zoom bombing moment. That's not possible. But perhaps this is. Is it possible for some centers to align care? Again, at a recent meeting, we asked this question. And while some centers think that it'll be difficult to achieve some semblance of alignment, there are actually quite a few, turns out maybe even the majority, that not only could, but actually may want to. And if this is possible, we could then return to our initial question. What is the optimal repair strategy? among children with CDH? Does an early repair strategy or a delayed nuanced surgical strategy optimize outcome? Each center could choose the approach that was most feasible for them, study it in a pragmatic way, and the outcomes compared. We'll answer more questions in a far shorter period of time while decreasing resource utilization. If we rely on clinical trials, I fear that we may all lose hope. But considering an alternative path may allow more children, like Kate is here, to hold their own baby pictures as opposed to their families doing it in memory. Thank you again for the opportunity. I look forward to an ongoing and lively, but clearly socially distanced virtual discussion.